The Nothing Phone 2A Plus is what in the automotive industry would be called a mid-cycle refresh. And there are two things that characterize any mid-cycle refresh. Number one, it's got to be roughly the same as the previous model because you spent all those months, maybe years developing a platform. You're not going to change that too much. And number two, it has to be different enough, tweaked enough to justify a bit of a price rise. That's the entire point of a mid-cycle refresh, is to gain more money from an already existing platform by providing you a quote-unquote new product. And on that front, the Phone 2A Plus is broadly the same as the 2A. You get the same form factor, the same size, the same 1080p screen, the same 5000 milliampere battery, the same lack of wireless charging, lack of eSIM, but the same user interface, the same beautiful, beautiful haptics that frankly are the best haptics that I have felt in this price point, which is awesome. And none of this is a bad thing because the Phone 2A was a fantastic phone and differentiated itself on pure execution. Just really good manufacturing, really good execution, and a fantastic user experience. And by extension, the 2A Plus is all of that. The question then is, how does the 2A Plus set itself apart from the 2A? And to do that, they've basically changed four things. Number one, you get this metallic finish on the back, you get a bit of a metallic finish on the side buttons, so a little bit of a facelift, a visual refresh as it were. Number two, it's the same 5000 milliampere battery, no wireless charging, and they claim the same 2-day battery life, which I think is closer to 1.5 days. That was my experience on the 2A. I have no reason to believe this is very much different. By the way, I did a whole video on that. You can go check that out after you see this video, of course. But the new one, the 2A Plus, charges at 50 watts, 10% more than the 45 watt charging of the previous phone. Fine. They've also changed the processor from the 7300 to the 7350. And real world, I didn't really notice any difference, and I didn't even expect to notice any difference. They say it's a 10% bump up. Okay, there is one scenario where it may make a difference. When I was running 3D benchmarks, the Phone 2A Plus did deliver sustained higher frame rates. And if you're playing a game at 100 frames per second, getting 5 or 10 more frames per second is probably not going to make a huge difference to your experience. But if that game was running at, say, a sort of inconsistent 25 frames per second, and the 2A Plus would then deliver a 30 frames per second with a little more consistency, then that is going to be a noticeable difference. So for those people running those games, I think there is going to be a little bit of a difference. But in the grand scheme of things, that is a small niche inside a small niche. So I'm going to say, just like that slightly faster wired charging, it's probably not going to make any real world difference for a lot of people. So on every count so far, 3 out of 4 counts, I think, the difference doesn't seem to be game changing until you get to the fourth change, and that's in the cameras. Okay, so I've always said the hallmark of a phenomenal game-changing budget smartphone or budget device of any sort is that it does two things. One, it never reminds you that you've bought a budget thing. It doesn't feel budget, it punches above its weight. And two, it makes you seriously reconsider spending more money for a higher tier product in the future. If it can do those two things, then it's basically a fantastic budget option. And the Nothing 2A did that on almost every front. I mean, yes, it didn't have eSIM support, didn't have wireless charging. These are things I can get over. They're not the end of the world. Also, there's that weird speakerphone thing. If you didn't know, both the 2A and the 2A Plus have only one speaker at the end, and basically amplifies the earphone speaker to work as a left channel. So there's this weird right channel bias, which you can correct in software. It's the sort of thing you don't get on flagships, right? So these things do remind you, but it's not the end of the world. Just pop on a pair of earphones, like all those ones that I review on this channel. Go check them out, subscribe, basically. So not a big deal until you get to the cameras. The rear cameras, though not the last word in detail, were handled very well by the software. Good HDR processing, great color science, good end result. But the front camera of the Nothing Phone 2A was the single greatest pull down that it had. It just made it unbearably bad. If you were ever in a video call, both the other person and you will be constantly reminded that the image is coming out of a cheap smartphone. Overprocessed, over-contrasted, low resolution. 1080p up to 60 frames per second they said, but it's not a great 1080p. Now the new one though goes all the way up to 4K 30 frames per second, and resolution isn't everything, so see for yourself. Okay, so this is the front-facing camera of the Nothing Phone 2a, the original one at 1080p 30 frames per second. I want you to take a good look at my face, at the textures. Is it over smoothened? What about movement? What does that look like? And this is the Nothing Phone 2a Plus. I can see the color science is a little different, but this is a 4K 30 frames per second video, which you couldn't do with the previous phone. And I don't know if there's a noticeable increase in detail or stabilization. Take a good look at my face, check for smoothing, check for sharpening, you know what to check for. But generally speaking, this is supposed to be a significant improvement in overall front-facing camera quality. Now, I don't know about you, but that was a massive difference. I did notice the color was a little reddish magenta on the 4a Plus, but that 4K 30 frames per second was so much better quality, better detail without being over sharpened. It just doesn't feel nearly as cheap. It felt significantly better, and I think this is the single greatest change they've made from the 2A to the 2A Plus. The question is that enough? Now, as it stands, MSRP for the Nothing Phone 2A right now is $349, $350. MSRP for the new 2A Plus is $400. That's $50 more expensive, or a 14% bump in price, roughly. However, as happens with all mid-cycle refreshes, the old model tends to be available at a cheaper rate, thereby usually making it the best sort of bang for buck options for people who are really tightening their budget. And in that sense, the Nothing Phone 2A still kind of wins, because at least where I live, you can get the 2A, the original one, for between $300 and $330, which is a good $70 to $100 cheaper than the 2A Plus. As it stands, when the 2A Plus comes out, that's going to be the price gap. You're going to have to tell me if that's enough of a difference for you to jump from the 2A to the 2A Plus. I think for a lot of people, it's not going to be. If you're really budget conscious, then that's not going to make enough of a difference. However, does that mean the 2A Plus is useless by itself? No. And here's why. I think currently the $400 price point seems to be in a bit of a vacuum, because what else can you get for the money? You can get the Pixel 6a, which this one's better in so many different ways. Better screen, better refresh rate, arguably a more unique feel to the user experience. I don't know, that's just me. But then you can get the Samsung Galaxy A54, which is probably the most nondescript, most boring phone you can get for the market. And even spec-wise, the Nothing Phone 2A Plus is better. Then you've got the iPhone SE, the less said the better. And then you've got maybe something from Motorola. They've been making a pretty good case for their Edge series. Maybe. Now, I am currently comparing the 2A with the Edge 50 Fusion. Both of them are roughly at the same price point. No spoilers, you're gonna have to subscribe and see how that one turns out. But I still think the 2A Plus has a very good thing going for it. It is individual enough that it doesn't get lost in the sea like a Samsung A54 does. It's got enough cooling that it'll probably outperform the Motorola. Okay, little spoilers. And more importantly, it doesn't skimp out on these specifications like a Pixel 6a does, which depends heavily on its AI features. And it's not an iPhone, so there's that. In a vacuum, if the 2A didn't exist, the 2A Plus is the one to go for. We just have a little time in history where, for the budget conscious, I really do think going $70 less, getting the 2A might be a better overall deal, and the rest of the money you could spend on a nice pair of earbuds or something. Again, I do review them. But if you wanted the best thing under $400, I would probably, on the street, if I met you, recommend the 2A Plus to you overall. Spend the extra money, get that great front camera, and then you get a few other nice things. Slightly faster charging, nice little facelift, what have you. That's just my opinion. What would you do? I'm going to go down in the comments and see what you would do, so hopefully you'll comment down there. But basically, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay happy, stay peaceful, stay colorful. Namaste.